So today we're going to be talking about setting up a non-destructive workflow for character development between Blender and Unreal. So we're going to be using a wraith-like character for the purposes of this example. And what I'm going to do here is just firstly go ahead and import a reference model. It's just a simple model that we downloaded off the internet. And we're going to use this model as our starting point for basing our non-destructive workflow. So a non-destructive workflow is really great because it gives us the ability to go back to different stages within production and not have to actually commit to anything in a destructive way such that we can't go back to those stages within production. So that means we'll be jumping back and forth between texturing, modeling, shading, and all sorts of different things. So one of the tools that I like using with regards to building humanoid characters is this application Make Human. So I did contribute a little bit modestly to developing the base mesh back when it was in Alpha 7, so that's quite a long time ago. But having worked a little bit with it, I could see the value in that model just in terms of the great topology that's within it, the really sort of efficient UV layout covering 0-1 texture space, and also just the ease of use with regards to the Make Human application. So that's why I use it, just to simply create these base meshes. And the purpose of this base mesh is just that we're going to export this as an OBJ, and then we're going to go ahead and import this OBJ back into our Blender scene. And the reason that we're doing that is because this OBJ is actually going to form the basis of that non-destructive workflow. So the reference model we downloaded, of course, it's just a reference model. It's just there for the purposes of helping us create the character that we eventually want to utilize. And the character that we want to utilize is going to be the one that we generate with this Make Human figure. So some of the changes that I wanted to make with regards to this reference model was that I just found it a little bit too clunky and complicated for my kind of style. So I wanted to basically change the hands. So what I did here was basically get the Make Human hands, replace those Make Human hands with the hands that were on this wraith model, and then cleaned up a little bit of the geometry that's on the wraith model that I downloaded. So you might be wondering, why not just use the wraith model itself? Well, the wraith model is completely unusable because it's got a lot of non-manifold geometry, and it would mean having to correct all of that, which would take equally as long as just simply building the model from scratch, and definitely not quite as much fun as building the model itself. So as you can see now, I've imported the actual Make Human model that will be utilized within the game's engine. So this is just the standard Make Human base mesh that I generated, which matches as close as possible to the final outcome. And what I'm doing here is just simply deforming the Make Human model to match the wraith model reference model's form as close as possible. Reason being is because once we've got the form matched up really nicely, and you don't have to be super accurate when you do this. In fact, actually, you don't really need to be very accurate at all when you're doing this. It's really just for the purposes of being able to roughly map one character's form to another, and the way that we're going to do that is by use of Blender's Shrinkwrap. So if you haven't used the Shrinkwrap modifier, it's a fantastic modifier with regards to developing characters, because it really helps with regards to setting up form and things like that. So now that I've got the Make Human general sort of model kind of laid out, I've just gone and added a rig onto it. Of course, it's just a Rigify rig, and the reason that I've done this is quite simply just for the purposes of testing the rig. There are other times when I've added the rig for the purposes of actually modeling the character. So you could say, for example, if your character is in a T pose, and as you can see, the Make Human model is imported in an A pose, Well, you could use the wraithCutFromBlendNEW0001 modifier to simply move your character from one position to another and then continue modeling in that regard. So I'm not using it for that case. This is just simply for the purposes of testing. And as you can see, I've just added the Shrinkwrap modifier to the make human model. That's the model that's going to go into the games engine. And now I'm targeting that wraith character. So you can see what the result is here of that targeting process, and as you can see, the results are pretty good just to start off with. So we've got the shape of the helmet in there, we've got the boots, and we've got a couple of other things. So the reason that we actually have the boots nicely targeted is also because I did a little bit of correcting on the feet of the character. So I moved the toes and stuff like that we didn't need, and then just fixed up the UVs a little in the background. So now that we have that make human model with the Shrinkwrap modifier applied to it, targeted to the reference model, we're pretty much good to go ahead and start sculpting. So because we are using a non-destructive workflow to start off with, the first phase of sculpting here is not going to be utilizing Dyn Topo. So of course Dyn Topo will result in a destructive workflow. So what we're really doing here is we've just added a multi-res modifier, and all we're doing is making general form adjustments here with sculpting. So what that means is we're not going to go ahead and destroy the topology. Of course, I needed to clean up the geometry a little bit here for the model that's going to be exported. And of course, this phase of the development process is destructive, and it's perfectly fine that this phase is destructive because we're deleting components. So in other words, it's fine that this phase is destructive because we simply just do not need any of this geometry that's in here. So when we delete these components, we're actually deleting them with the intent of also removing all of the UVs and other kind of things that we would have wanted to have kept in a non-destructive workflow. So now that I have the main character's form laid out within the model that will be exported to Unreal, I've just gone ahead and created a duplicate of this. Now the reason that I've created a duplicate of this model is because this is actually the model that will be utilized for the destructive sculpting process. So of course, just modeling with multi-res is not going to give you as much resolution as you need for your normal map that will be utilized in the game. As a result, we duplicate the model that will ultimately be exported into the game engine, and to the duplicate we apply Dyn Topo sculpting. So this is where we use our destructive sculpting techniques to increase the amount of geometry, modify the model's topology, but that's all totally fine because we're not actually utilizing this 3D asset within our production pipeline. All that we're utilizing this 3D asset for essentially is for a target that will be generated when we apply the Shrinkwrap modifier to our character that's going to be exported, and then on the Shrinkwrap modifier we will on the model that's been shrink wrapped, we will then bake a multi-res normal map from that model. So as you can see, it really doesn't matter how much sculpting you want to do here, or what sort of sculpting techniques you want to use. You could use any kind of sculpting tools. You don't need to worry about utilizing a destructive workflow in that sense. So as you can see, I've just gone ahead and I use the clay strips brush as well as the smooth brush, and that gives me the ability to get all of the sort of details that I need. So once I've got both models, so as you can see, I've got the wraith model that will be exported to the games engine, and that's going to have a multi-res modifier as well as the shrink wrap. Now of course the shrink wrap will eventually have to be applied. As you can see over here, I've got the shrink wrap and it's targeted to the high-res model. I then go ahead and subdivide the multi-res to give me all of the resolution that I need. So what we're looking at here is the actual games model with all the details that is been inherited from the sculpted model. Once I have that games model with the multi-res, I can then go ahead and apply the shrink wrap, reduce that multi-res count to 0, and then bake a normal map using the multi-res modifier. So as you can see, we've got our wraith model with a normal map. So like I said, this process is totally non-destructive. So as long as we keep all of the components within our scene, including the sculpt model, the games model, etc., we can jump ahead between different stages of production. So as you can see, now I'm working both on sculpting simultaneously as well as texture mapping.